I became a millionaire because my wife left me. What happened next and who made it possible will shock you. Let me start from the beginning. The table was laid out for 6 people who were no longer a family. On the kitchen counter, a handwritten note rested beside my wedding ring, and together they felt heavier than the mortgage on our quiet suburban Chicago house ever had. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the controlled demolition of my entire life as a father, leaving me alone with 4 kids still asleep upstairs, completely unaware that their mother had just decided freedom mattered more than them. The air smelled like burnt coffee and bad decisions, the kind of quiet that only exists right before everything explodes for good. If you're the type who believes the deepest wounds eventually turn into armor, you might want to stick around because this was only the opening shot. The sound of the suitcase zipper sliced through the bedroom, loud and final, like a gunshot in an empty room. That sharp, ugly ZZT wasn't just a zipper closing. It was a door slamming shut on an entire life. I stood frozen in the doorway of the master bedroom, my tie loosened, my body wrecked from a 10-hour shift at the lab. The exhaustion sat deep under my eyes, carved into the gray shadows staring back at me in the mirror. I watched Rachel smooth the lapel of her beige trench coat like she was preparing for a photo shoot, not abandoning her family. She looked flawless. She always did. Even while she was tearing everything apart, not a single hair was out of place. "You're really not even going to wait until they wake up?" I asked. My voice came out rough and hollow, completely empty of the anger I thought I'd feel. I wasn't angry. I was numb. Shock had taken the wheel and I was just along for the ride. Rachel didn't even turn around. She leaned closer to the vanity mirror and applied one last layer of lipstick. Steady hands, no hesitation. "If I wait, Daniel, I'll never leave," she said calmly. "And if I don't leave now, I'm going to die in this house." Die! I stepped into the room, the floorboards groaning under my weight. "We have 4 kids, Rachel. Connor is 10. The twins are barely 5. You're not suffocating." She spun around fast, her eyes sharp and frantic, like a cornered animal. "I'm not suffocating," she snapped. "I'm drowning. I'm drowning in laundry, packed lunches, your student loans, and this pathetic mediocrity." Her voice didn't shake. Mine almost did. "I didn't sign up for this," she continued. "I signed up for potential. I signed up for the brilliant scientist who was supposed to change the world." She looked me up and down like a disappointment she couldn't return. "Instead, I got a tired man who smells like chemicals and failure." The words hit hard. Physical. Brutal. I felt them land, felt myself flinch, but I didn't step back. "We're building something," I said. "Things like that take time." "I don't have time," she fired back, grabbing the handle of her Louis Vuitton carry-on, one of the only luxuries she'd refused to give up when money got tight. "Ethan is waiting." The name dropped into the room and stayed there. Ethan. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Ethan Miller, real estate developer. Her mentor, the guy with the Bentley and the Gold Coast penthouse. "So that's it," I said, letting out a short, bitter laugh. "You're trading us in like an old car." "I'm choosing survival," she corrected, brushing past me. She stopped at the door, her hand resting on the frame. For half a second, I let myself hope. Hope for regret. Hope for the woman I married 10 years earlier. Instead, she looked at me with pity. "The kids are resilient, Daniel," she said softly. "They'll adjust. Better than I ever could." "They're not furniture," I whispered. My fists clenched so tight my hands hurt. "You walk out that door, you don't come back. Ever. You don't get to show up for Christmas when it suits you." She gave me a tight, sad smile. "I think that's for the best," she said. "I'm not cut out for this. I never was." She walked down the hallway. I followed, my legs heavy, my body moving on instinct alone. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched her open the massive oak front door. A blast of freezing Chicago air rushed in, snow scattering across the entryway. She never looked up toward the second floor, where 4 quiet bedrooms waited. She didn't ask to say goodbye to Connor, Evan, Sophie, or Emily. She just stepped into the night. Her heels clicked against the porch steps, then disappeared into the growl of an engine waiting outside. I stayed there long after the taillights vanished. The house was dead silent. I checked the clock. 8:42 p.m. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. I turned to see Connor standing at the railing in his flannel pajamas, gripping a comic book like it was a lifeline. His eyes were wide, sharp, and way too old for a 10-year-old face. "Dad?" he asked quietly. "Was that Mom?" Something inside me shattered beyond repair. I swallowed hard, forcing calm onto my face like armor. I walked up the stairs, knelt down in front of him, and met his eyes. "Yeah, buddy," I said. My voice cracked, just barely. "Is she coming back?" I looked at the empty space behind me where my wife used to exist. Then I looked back at my son, who needed me to be solid, not broken. "No," I said, pulling him into my chest, holding him so tight I was afraid to let go. "She's not." The sun rose over Chicago the next morning with cruel indifference, flooding the kitchen with light that made the table feel more like an interrogation room than a home. I hadn't slept. I spent the whole night planted in that leather armchair in the living room, eyes locked on the front door like I could will it to open. I kept waiting for the soft click of a key in the lock. It never happened. By the time 6:30 a.m. rolled around, the day wasn't starting, it was attacking. "Daddy, I can't find my blue hair tie," Sophie screamed from the top of the stairs, already cranky and loud. "And Emily's wearing my socks," Evan yelled from the hallway, and a second later I heard a thud, like he'd punctuated the complaint with a shove or a stomp. I stood at the kitchen counter staring at 4 lunchboxes lined up like a judge's sentence. Rachel always packed them, perfectly organized, like she was running a tiny, smug little operation. Bento boxes, fruit cut into neat pieces, organic crackers, everything measured, everything controlled. Now it was me, holding a loaf of white bread in one hand and a jar of peanut butter in the other, feeling useless in a way I hated. I spent my life working on complex cellular regeneration, dealing in science most people couldn't even pronounce, and somehow I couldn't figure out how she made those crusts come off so clean. "Coming, Sophie?" I called out, and my voice sounded like rust. I moved through the house like I didn't belong in it anymore, like a ghost stuck haunting his own life. I dressed the twins with fingers that felt too big for their tiny buttons, fumbling with their cardigans until I finally got it right. I tied Evan's shoes, double knotting them the way he liked. I found Sophie's blue hair tie jammed under the sofa, and that tiny victory didn't feel like a victory at all. Every small chore was just another reminder that Rachel was gone. Even the house betrayed me. There was still a faint trace of her perfume in the air, like some smug little afterimage of the woman who walked out without blinking. By 7:15 a.m., all 4 kids were sitting at the table eating slightly burnt toast and oatmeal that came out lumpy no matter how much I stirred it. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick and heavy. Connor, my oldest, kept his head down and refused to look at the empty chair at the end of the table like the chair might bite him back. "Where's Mommy?" Emily asked, swinging her legs under the table, a milk mustache smeared across her upper lip. "Is she sleeping?" I froze with the coffee pot hovering over my mug, like I'd been caught doing something illegal. Across the table, I met Connor's eyes. He gave me the smallest shake of his head, barely noticeable, but I understood him. It was a quiet agreement between the men in the house. Don't break the little ones if we can help it. Mommy had to go away for a while," I said. The lie tasted like ash. "It's for work. She has a big project." "She didn't say goodbye," Evan muttered, poking at his oatmeal like he was trying to punish it. "It was very sudden," I said fast, turning my face away so they wouldn't see the wetness building in my eyes. I hated that weakness, hated that my body still reacted like I cared. "All right, backpacks. Bus comes in 10 minutes. Coats, scarves, shoes, morning chaos exploded the second I said it. And right in the middle of it, my phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from my banking app. Mortgage alert. I picked it up, swiped into the account, and checked the balance because I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I planned to move money from savings to checking, cover the house payment, keep the utilities alive. Simple. Mechanical. I tapped the savings tab. 0, 0, 0. I blinked hard. Refresh. Maybe the Wi-Fi was slow. Maybe the app was glitching. The screen reloaded and mocked me again, joint savings at 0. Checking showed about $400. My breath caught. I opened the transaction history, my thumb suddenly clumsy. There it was. A transfer from yesterday at 4 p.m. A wire transfer to J. Harper personal account. She didn't just leave me. She drained me. 10 years of savings. The emergency fund. The money we set aside for the kids' braces. The rainy day cushion I told myself made us safe. Gone, swept clean like it never existed. Dad, the bus! Connor shouted from the front door. I looked up with the phone trembling in my hand, and for a second the room actually tilted. The mortgage was due in 3 days. I had 4 children to feed and barely $400 to my name. Rachel hadn't just walked away. She had surgically removed my ability to keep a roof over our heads. I looked at my kids standing there, clean, bundled up, oblivious, like they weren't inches from falling off a cliff. Go, I choked out, forcing a smile that felt like it was tearing my face in half. Have a great day. I love you guys. The door slammed shut, and the silence rushed back in like cold water. I grabbed the granite countertop so hard my knuckles turned white, and that's when the first real wave of panic hit me. Pure, raw, unfiltered. It felt like 6 months of winter moved into the house and decided to stay. Outside, Chicago was starting to thaw. Spring slush turning the snow into gray mess along the roads. But inside my home, the air stayed frozen with anxiety. I ended up on a stool in the converted garage. My sanctuary turned into a storage unit and a prison at the same time. The concrete seeped cold through my socks. The deep freezer hummed. The fluorescent light flickered. And those were the only sounds I could trust. On the workbench sat the pieces of my life, my centrifuge, my scanning microscope, stacks of notebooks stuffed with formulas for synthetic tissue regeneration. Beside the microscope was a cardboard box marked Cell. I rubbed my face, feeling the rough stubble scrape my palm. The bank had called 3 times this week already. Always polite, always firm, always asking for money I didn't have. Rachel's exit tax left a crater in my finances I couldn't fill on a junior researcher's salary, and the extra shifts at the university lab weren't even close to enough. There was an offer sitting on the table, a foreman job at a chemical processing plant in Indiana. Brutal work, mindless work, but it paid 40% more than my research grant. It would save the house, and it would kill everything in me that still mattered. I reached for the microscope, heavy in my hands, and my fingers shook just a little. You're putting it in the wrong box. I jerked so hard I almost dropped the lens. I spun around and saw Connor standing in the doorway of the garage. He changed in the last 6 months in ways I wasn't ready to admit. His shoulders had broadened. His posture was straighter, and the softness that used to live in his eyes had been worn down by reality. He was wearing a t-shirt that had clearly been outgrown, stretched tight across his chest. My first instinct was to mentally check the budget for new clothes. Then I remembered there was no budget. Hey, bud, I said. My voice came out thick and uneven. Didn't hear you come in. Connor stepped farther into the garage, ignoring the cold concrete and the humming machines. His eyes went straight to the cardboard box marked Cell, then to the microscope and equipment laid out on the bench. He didn't look like a kid standing there. He looked like a tired partner. You're selling the scope, he said. Not a question. Why? We need the money, I replied, sinking back onto the stool. The mortgage. It's complicated. I'm thinking about taking that job at the plant. I swallowed and kept going. It pays better. I'd be home by 6 every night. But you hate that kind of work, Connor said flatly. I winced. You said it's for people who stopped asking questions. Sometimes questions don't pay the heating bill. I snapped before I could stop myself. The words hung there, sharp and ugly. I immediately hated myself for it. I'm sorry, I added quickly. I'm just trying to do what's right. For you, for Evan, for the girls. Connor didn't argue. He walked over to the workbench and ran a finger slowly along the spine of one of my research journals. Mom left because she said you were dreaming, he said quietly. Hearing her mentioned always sucked the air out of the room. Every single time. She said you were chasing something that wasn't real. I looked down at my hands. For a second, I let the doubt in. Maybe she was right. If you sell this, Connor said, turning to face me. His eyes locked on mine, fierce and unblinking. Then she is right. The words hit harder than anything Rachel ever said. You prove her right. I stared at him. His jaw was set in the same stubborn line I'd seen in my own reflection more times than I could count. I can help more, he continued, his voice growing steadier. I can help with Evan and the twins. I can make lunches. I can learn the laundry so the whites don't turn pink. He paused, then took a breath. We don't need new sneakers. We don't need pizza nights. But we do need you to keep doing this. He tapped the notebook. Because if you stop, then everything that happened was for nothing. The silence in the garage stretched out, heavy enough to crush bone. I looked at the box, then the microscope, then back at my son. Behind his courage, I saw the fear that all the pain, all the sacrifice, meant absolutely nothing. I stood up. Something hot and violent ignited in my chest. Not anger, not hope, combustion. You're not selling it? Connor asked. No, I said. I picked up the box and shoved it under the workbench, hard and final. No, I'm not. We're going to be broke, I told him. We're going to be tired. This is going to be brutal. I don't care, he said without hesitation. I gripped his shoulder and squeezed tight. Go inside. Start your homework. I've got work to do. When Connor walked back into the house, I sat down at the bench and opened my notebook to a blank page. I wasn't doing this for awards anymore. I wasn't doing it for recognition or money. I was doing it because my 10-year-old son had just given me permission to become something dangerous. 3 years turned that garage into a sealed-off fortress of science and isolation. The smell of oil and gasoline disappeared, replaced by ozone and isopropyl alcohol. It was 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the only light on the block came from the monitors reflecting off my exhausted face. I rubbed my eyes. Sleep deprivation burned like sand under my lids. On the bench, buried between wires and petri dishes, sat a copy of Chicago Social Magazine. Sophie, now 8, had brought it home from a friend's house, completely unaware of the damage it could do. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Page 41. The Gold Coast Golden Couple. There was Rachel. She wore a silver gown that probably cost more than my car. A champagne flute rested in her hand as she laughed at something Ethan Miller whispered into her ear. The caption read, Rachel Miller on the art of reinvention and finding true happiness. She looked younger than she ever had with me. No stress lines. No exhaustion. No weight from 4 children who needed homework help, rides to practice, or someone who showed up emotionally. She hadn't called for the twins' 8th birthday the week before. A generic card, no check, had arrived 3 days late. Reinvention? I muttered, the word sour and bitter. I turned away from the magazine and faced the incubator. Inside, sample 89B was in a critical bonding phase. For 3 years, I'd been trying to make synthetic polymers behave like human skin, elastic, durable, and accepted by living cells. Every attempt failed. The matrix always collapsed after 4 hours. I watched the timer. 4 hours, 30 minutes, and 10 seconds. 10 seconds until failure. I held my breath. Above me, the house was silent. Connor, now 13 and taller than me, was asleep. Evan was 11. The girls were safe. They were the reason I was still here instead of asleep. They were the reason I wore shirts with frayed collars so they could have cleats on their feet. 4 o'clock. I leaned closer, my face inches from the glass. And for the first time, it didn't collapse. Normally, this was the moment everything went wrong. By now, the solution should have turned cloudy, that milky haze that always signaled cellular rejection. But 044 Dashafrin stayed crystal clear. Perfect. Untouched. The suspension held. My heart started slamming against my ribs. I typed a command into the computer and pulled up the microscopic feed. The lattice structure filled the screen, and instead of collapsing like it always did, it was changing. Not breaking, weaving, growing. The synthetic cells weren't fighting the biological scaffold anymore. They were accepting it. For 05. I don't even remember breathing. My God! I whispered. I didn't yell. I didn't celebrate. There was no rush of joy. What hit me was relief so deep it felt like something painful being pulled out of my body. I sank back into the chair, the wheels rolling a few inches across the concrete floor. My eyes drifted to the magazine on the bench. Rachel's perfect, airbrushed smile stared back at me. She'd left because she thought I was a dead end. She had bet against me. I picked up the magazine and dropped it straight into the trash, right on top of a pile of failed experiments. Let it rot with the rest of my past. I stood and walked toward the door that led into the house. I needed to see them. I moved quietly up the stairs, careful not to wake anyone. Connor was sprawled across his bed, all arms and legs. Evan was buried under a chaotic mountain of blankets. The twins slept peacefully in their bunk beds. They didn't know it yet. They didn't know that the clear liquid sitting in the garage below them had just changed everything. They didn't know their father had solved a problem pharmaceutical giants had been bleeding money over for 10 years. I leaned against the doorframe of the girls' room and listened to the steady rhythm of their breathing. I wasn't the man who smelled like failure anymore. I was the man who had just rewritten the future. And I did it without her. The boardroom on the 45th floor of the Willis Tower overlooked Lake Michigan, blue and endless, about as far from my suburban garage as a place could be. I sat at the long mahogany table, hands clasped tight to hide the faint tremor in my fingers. I wore my best suit. It was 3 years old, and I knew the cuffs were fraying. Across from me sat Thomas Reed, a venture capitalist with a reputation for chewing startups up and spitting out the bones. He flipped through the dossier labeled Harper Helix, a name I'd trademarked the night after the breakthrough. Synthetic tissue regeneration with 0 rejection rate, he murmured, not bothering to look up. Sounds like science fiction. Or alchemy. It's biology, I said evenly. And it works. You saw the data. You saw the prototype. Reed closed the folder and removed his glasses. He studied me in silence. I thought about the foreclosure notices hidden in my desk drawer. I thought about Connor's sneakers with holes in the toes because he refused to ask for new ones. I thought about the twins splitting a single Happy Meal because they said they weren't that hungry. I did see the data, Reed said finally, and I had my own team verify it. He slid a sheet of paper across the table. A term sheet. My eyes dropped to the number at the bottom. $5 million. Seed money. Enough to erase the mortgage 10 times over. Enough for college funds. Enough to buy freedom. There's a condition, Reed said, tapping the page. We move operations into a real facility. No more garage. Fair. We also want a CEO. You stick to the science. I picked up the pen, then paused. I'll hire a CEO eventually, I said. But for now I run it. And I don't work weekends. My weekends belong to my kids. Reed raised an eyebrow. This is a billion-dollar industry. You don't get weekends. Then keep your money, I said, pushing the paper back toward him. I already lost my marriage to this work. I'm not losing my children too. He stared at me, surprised by the steel in the eyes of a man wearing a worn-out suit. Then he smiled, slow and impressed. Integrity, he said. Rare. He slid the paper back. All right, Daniel. Run it your way. Just make me money. I signed. An hour later, I stepped out onto Wacker Drive. The wind cut through me. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel cold. Felt clean. I drove my beat-up sedan home, the engine rattling like it always had. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Missing shingles, overgrown lawn. But to me, it looked different. It wasn't a prison anymore. It was safe. I opened the front door and immediately smelled burning pasta. Dad! Emily, now 9, came sprinting down the hallway. Evan tried to cook dinner and melted the spoon. I walked into the kitchen. Smoke hovered in the air. Evan waved a towel like he was fighting a fire. Connor scraped charred remains off the stove. They froze when they saw me. They knew where I'd been. They knew what today was. Connor set the spatula down carefully. Did they like it? I looked at my 4 kids. Tired, scrappy, growing up faster than they should have. I loosened my tie and tossed it onto the counter. They loved it, I said quietly. I smiled. Pack your bags, guys. We're going to have a real dinner tonight, I said. A place with waiters. Sophie's eyes went wide like I just promised her the moon. Can we get appetizers? She asked. You can order anything you want, I said, my throat tightening. You can get everything. Connor didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just stepped forward and rested his forehead against my shoulder. The weight of that simple gesture almost knocked me off balance. It wasn't celebration, it was release. We'd clawed our way out of the hole. For the first time in years, we were standing on solid ground, the dirt finally scrubbed from our hands. The silence in the penthouse on the 42nd floor had nothing in common with the silence of the suburban bungalow Rachel left 7 years earlier. That old silence had been thick with resentment, dirty dishes, and crying babies. This one was curated. It smelled like lilies and chilled Pinot Grigio. Rachel Miller sat on an Italian leather sofa, staring out at Chicago spread beneath her like a carpet of diamonds. At 42, her skin was still tight, thanks to fillers and chemical peels that cost more than a compact car, but her eyes never stopped moving. Always searching, always hungry. She checked her phone. No messages from Ethan. He was closing a deal in New York. That was the official explanation. But she'd seen the credit card statement sitting on the counter that morning before the housekeeper filed it away. A charge from Cartier, Manhattan. She hadn't received a bracelet. Rachel took a long sip of wine, the taste sharp and cold, and told herself it didn't matter. This was the agreement she'd made. She traded affection for security, chaos for order. She wasn't buried in laundry anymore. She wasn't drowning in packed lunches. She was free. And freedom, she was slowly learning, was painfully boring. On impulse, helped along by wine and wounded vanity, she opened the browser on her tablet. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than she liked to admit. Then she typed a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Daniel Harper. She expected nothing. Maybe an obituary. Maybe a mugshot. Something small and sad that would confirm she'd made the right choice. The page loaded. Academic citations appeared first, dense, unreadable titles about polymer scaffolds and reconstructive biology. A LinkedIn profile followed. No photo. Fewer than 50 connections. No Facebook. No Instagram. No vacation photos. No gala shots. No visible life. Rachel exhaled slowly, a thin, cruel smile tugging at her lips. Still a ghost, she whispered. She clicked another result. A university faculty directory. It listed him as a former associate researcher. Former. He quit, she muttered. Or they fired him. She pictured him still stuck in that drafty house, probably renting rooms to survive. The kids would be teenagers now. Connor would be 14, maybe 15. She tried to picture his face, but it blurred, smothered by years of intentional forgetting. They were better off, she told herself. They wouldn't have wanted a mother who resented them. She'd done them a favor by leaving them with the parent who actually enjoyed the grind. She scrolled again. No mention of a new wife. No smiling replacement mother filling her space. He's alone, she said softly. The realization settled over her like a warm blanket. If Daniel was alone and struggling, then she had one. She was the one in the penthouse. She was the one wrapped in silk. She hadn't abandoned a family. She'd escaped a sinking ship. The elevator chimed. Rachel snapped the tablet shut as the doors slid open. Ethan walked in without looking at her. He smelled like recycled airplane air and cheap floral perfume that didn't belong to her. He went straight to the bar and poured himself a scotch. "How was New York?" she asked, keeping her voice flat, controlled. "Fine," he grunted, loosening his tie. "Long." He didn't ask about her day. He didn't notice the new dress. He didn't mention Cartier. Rachel stared at the back of his head, a flash of hatred flaring in her chest before she crushed it down. This was fine. This was the deal. She glanced at the dark screen of her tablet, her reflection staring back at her. Carefully maintained and deeply alone. Out in the suburbs, she imagined Daniel reheating microwave dinners for 4 resentful teenagers, suffocating in mediocrity. "Poor Daniel," she murmured, lifting her glass. She had no idea that, at that exact moment 20 miles north, Daniel Harper was signing off on blueprints for a $40 million research campus, while Dr. Margaret Collins laughed at something he said, her hand resting comfortably, intimately on his arm. The massive television in the corner of the penthouse remained muted, but the ticker crawling along the bottom of the screen blazed in neon green. Caldwell Helix. Sales. The ticker on the screen said it all. Opened at $45. Climbed to 82. Market cap pushing for billion. I stood at the kitchen island chopping bell peppers. I was wearing a faded college t-shirt and old jeans, the same ones I used for yard work, while financial analysts on television dissected my face like I was some abstract concept. According to the scrolling headlines, I was one of the wealthiest men in Illinois. According to my sink, I was still the guy responsible for washing vegetables for taco night. "Dad, turn it off," Connor said as he walked into the kitchen. At 20, he was my mirror image, same build, same eyes, home for the summer from Cornell where he was studying architecture. He nodded toward the TV. "It's weird seeing your face next to the word billionaire." He squinted. "Also, you look constipated in that photo." I was nervous. I laughed, sliding the peppers into a bowl. "And you're not wrong." I grabbed the remote. "It's just noise." The screen went dark, and the calm returned to the Lake Forest house. It was a beautiful place. Bought 2 years earlier, open, bright, wrapped in trees. The kind of home Rachel used to talk about like it was a finish line. The kind filled with the laughter she chose to walk away from. The front door burst open, bringing chaos with it. Evan, 18 and built like a linebacker, came in first, juggling 3 bags of groceries. Behind him were the twins, Sophie and Emily, 15 now and inseparable. Trailing them was Margaret Collins, balancing a dessert box. Margaret was 40, with laugh lines etched around her eyes and a warmth that could melt a Chicago winter without trying. She ran pediatrics at the hospital where my foundation funded research. She wasn't polished the way Rachel had been. No heels, no angles, no performance. She was real. "I brought cannoli," Margaret announced, setting the box down. "And since the stock market didn't implode, I assume I don't have to pay for dinner?" "You never pay for dinner," Evan said, grabbing a bottle of water. "Dad says your company is payment enough." Heat crept up my neck. Margaret smiled at me. Soft, genuine, knowing, and something in my chest loosened. "Congratulations, Daniel," she said quietly, stepping closer. She rested a hand on my arm. Simple, grounding, more real than any number in a bank account. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Surreal," I admitted. "I'm just glad the college funds are locked in." She laughed. "The college funds were secure 3 years ago. Now you're just securing college for your great-grandkids." Dinner was loud, chaotic, perfect. No stiff silences, no walking on eggshells. We argued about movies, teased Evan about his prom date, and nearly started a war over deep dish versus thin crust pizza. I watched Margaret with the girls. Sophie rambled through a long, winding story about her soccer coach. Margaret leaned in, asked questions, actually listened. She didn't try to replace anyone. They had a mother, even if she was absent. Margaret was simply present. She loved them because they were good kids, not because of what my last name was worth. As the night wound down and the kids drifted off to their rooms or the media lounge, I walked Margaret out to her car. The air was crisp, crickets chirping in the hedges. "They love you," I said, leaning against her door. "I love them," she replied easily. She looked up at me, serious now. "You did good, Daniel. You built a fortress around them, but you didn't make them hard." I exhaled. "I didn't do it alone." She reached up and adjusted my collar. "I'm not going anywhere. The money doesn't scare me. The past doesn't scare me. Standing there under the moonlight, it hit me. For 10 years, I'd been a soldier in survival mode. The war was over. I could finally take the armor off. I know, I whispered. I kissed her. Not desperate. Not hungry. Promise. Upstairs, the twins watched from the window, grinning. The circle wasn't breaking. It was expanding. The invitation felt heavy in Rachel's hand. Cream-colored cardstock. Gold leaf lettering. Elegant. Expensive. Impossible to ignore under the chandelier of her walk-in closet. The inaugural Harper Helix Charity Gala. $6,000 per plate. She stared at the credit card receipt on her vanity. Declined twice before finally going through, on a card she'd hidden from Ethan. A card that was now completely maxed out. Things with Ethan hadn't just soured. They'd rotted. The penthouse had turned into neutral territory. A cold war of avoided eye contact and slammed doors. His real estate empire was stretched too thin. Her commission checks were drying up as her social circle quietly recalculated her relevance. She needed a lifeline, a new client, a new investor, or, though she barely let herself think it, a new husband. Her gaze drifted back to the invitation. Harper Helix. She traced the name Harper with her manicured fingernail. For one sharp, terrifying second, a memory punched through. Daniel in a stained lab coat, rambling about polymers and scaffolds. Eyes lit up with something she'd stopped respecting. Her heart skipped. Then she laughed. Short. Dismissive. Impossible, she said to the empty room. Daniel Harper clipped coupons. Daniel Harper drove a 10-year-old sedan. Daniel Harper let his wife walk out because he couldn't afford to keep her. The idea that her Daniel, the man she discarded like an outdated accessory, could be the force behind the largest biotech empire in the city was absurd. Harper was a common name. Thousands of them. This CEO was probably some old money heir from the East Coast, born into money and polished by generations of it. Not the exhausted father of 4 she left behind in the suburbs. Satisfied by her own arrogance, Rachel turned toward the mirror. She was 44 now. Time had been kind, but only because she paid it to be. She sucked in her stomach and zipped the emerald green gown. Vintage. Dangerous. Cut low enough to demand attention. She applied lipstick with surgical precision, masking the slight downturn at the corners of her mouth that had settled in over the last miserable year. "You are Rachel Miller," she whispered to her reflection. "You are a survivor." She wasn't going to this gala to celebrate science. She was going to hunt. Chicago needed to be reminded she was still beautiful, still relevant, still available to the highest bidder. Downstairs, the black Uber idled. Ethan wasn't coming. He'd laughed when she mentioned the ticket price, told her she was insane to waste money on a room full of nerds. Let him laugh, she thought, stepping into the cold November night, the same time of year she left Daniel 10 years earlier. The wind cut against her bare shoulders, a ghost from that night, but she ignored it. The car slid toward the loop, pulling up to the Palmer House Hilton. Chaos. Glamour. Camera flashes cracked like lightning. Limousines lined the curb 3 deep. Security was tight. Rachel stepped out, chin high, handing her invitation to the doorman. "Welcome to the gala, Mrs. Miller," he said. Scanning the QR code, she swept past him into the ballroom. It stole her breath. A sea of tuxedos and couture gowns stretched wall to wall. At the center of the room, a massive holographic double helix rotated slowly in midair, glowing blue and white. She took a champagne flute from a passing tray and began scanning for targets. The mayor, tech founders, old money, the elite she belonged with. She didn't see the 4 young adults near the stage watching the entrance. She didn't see the tall man in the bespoke tuxedo standing with his back to her, speaking quietly to a woman in red. She sipped her champagne, the bubbles dancing on her tongue, a thrill blooming in her chest. She felt safe, anonymous, powerful. She had no idea she'd just walked into a courtroom, and the verdict was about to be read. The lights dimmed. The room sank into a hushed twilight, the kind of silence reserved for royalty or extreme wealth. Rachel was mid-smile, charming a silver-haired investment banker named William. Then William turned away from her completely. "Here we go," he whispered, reverent. "The man of the hour." "They say he turned down a Pfizer buyout last week," William added. Unbelievable. Annoyance flickered through her. Being ignored never sat well. But she turned toward the stage, smoothing her expression into polite interest. She lifted her glass. The announcer's voice boomed through the room, vibrating in her chest. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of Harper Helix, the man rewriting the future of regenerative medicine, Mr. Daniel Harper." Her glass froze halfway to her lips. The curtain parted. A man stepped into the spotlight. He was tall, broad-shouldered. His tuxedo fit with brutal precision, the kind only Italian tailoring achieved. Silver touched his temples, sharpening his presence instead of softening it. He walked with calm authority, not the shuffle of a debt-buried researcher, the stride of a titan. Rachel blinked. The room tilted. The champagne curdled in her stomach. It was Daniel, but it wasn't her Daniel. This wasn't the man who smelled like bleach and desperation. This wasn't the man she left crying in a hallway. This man radiated control. His jaw was harder. His eyes were clear, focused, dangerous. He looked magnificent. "No," she breathed. The word vanished under the thunderous applause. "It's not possible." She stumbled back, colliding with a waiter, not bothering to apologize. Because in that moment, Rachel Miller finally understood something she had spent a decade denying. She hadn't escaped a sinking ship. She had abandoned the man who built an empire. She couldn't look away. I lifted one hand, and the room obeyed. The noise died instantly. I smiled, not the polite, rehearsed kind, but the real one. The smile I hadn't worn in 15 years. "Thank you," I said. My voice carried easily across the hall, calm and grounded. 12 years ago, I started this company in a garage. No heat. One microscope I nearly sold just to make rent. And one clear motivation. I didn't need to look at her to feel it. Rachel went pale. 12 years. The math hit her all at once. That winter, the night she left. I was told, I continued, letting my eyes sweep the crowd, that I was a dreamer, that I was wasting my time, that I should pick something safer. I paused. For a split second, she felt it, that impossible fear that my gaze cut through the crowd and landed right on her. She shrank back into the shadow of a pillar, her heart hammering like it wanted out. "But I had 4 reasons to keep going," I said, my voice softening. "For people who needed me to become more than I was." I gestured toward the wing of the stage. "I'd like you to meet the heart of this family, my children." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. 4 figures stepped into the light. Connor first, tall, broad-shouldered, effortless confidence in a tailored suit. He looked like the kind of man people expected great things from. Then Evan, rugged, composed, eyes sharp. And then the twins, Sophie and Emily, 22 and 17 now, stunning, poised, wearing designer gowns like they were born in them. They didn't look broken. They didn't look abandoned. They looked unshakable. They took their places beside me. I wrapped an arm around Sophie's shoulder. Connor clapped Evan on the back. It wasn't staged. It was earned. "They are the reason Harper Helix exists," I said. "They're my greatest experiment and my greatest success." The applause this time was thunder. The room loved them. The city loved them. Rachel stood alone in the dark, gripping an empty glass. She had walked away from a man she thought was a loser. Now she stood watching that same man receive a standing ovation, flanked by the children she once called a burden. She expected triumph. What she felt instead was hollow, cold wind tearing through her chest. She hadn't escaped. She'd been left behind. The applause faded into the low hum of a cocktail hour. Jazz floated through the ballroom, mixing with crystal and quiet deals being struck. I stood near an ice sculpture, surrounded by investors and admirers. Margaret stood beside me, my hand resting lightly at her lower back. Not possessive, just present. To my right, Connor and Evan politely declined business cards from men who wouldn't have acknowledged them 10 years ago. The twins laughed at something Margaret whispered, their joy unforced and real. From across the room, Rachel watched. 2 glasses of champagne in, the tremor in her hands had been replaced by entitlement. Burning, insistent. They were her children. That was her husband. That success should have been hers. She moved through the crowd like a predator, ignoring the bankers she'd been flirting with earlier. She needed to reach us before we left, before the moment passed. As she drew closer, the space around my family subtly widened. People stepped back instinctively. Rachel didn't. She stepped straight through it. Daniel. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through the noise. I froze. I didn't turn right away. The smile on my face didn't fall. It evaporated, leaving nothing behind. Beside me, Margaret stiffened. Slowly, I turned. 10 years. That's how long it had been. Rachel smiled, the practiced, trembling version meant to unlock sympathy. You were incredible up there, she said. Truly. I looked at her, at the lines she paid to soften, at the desperation clinging to her like cheap perfume. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. I studied her the way I used to study samples under a microscope, detached, precise. Rachel, I said evenly, I didn't realize you were invited. I had to come, she stammered, then shifted her attention to the kids. She stepped toward the twins. Sophie, Emily. My God, look at you. The response was instant and merciless. Sophie and Emily didn't smile. They didn't cry. They moved together, one synchronized step back, shoulders touching, a defensive formation they'd learned long ago. Hello, Rachel, Sophie said. Her voice was ice. She didn't say Mom. Rachel recoiled as if struck. She recovered quickly. She always did, and turned her attention toward the boys, her smile reassembling itself for the next attempt. Connor, Evan, you're so handsome, Rachel said quickly. You look just like your father. Connor, now towering over her, looked down without a trace of the confused 10-year-old she remembered. He held a glass of sparkling water, his grip tight enough to whiten his knuckles. We're busy, Rachel. Busy. She laughed softly, breathy and disbelieving, reaching out as if she still had permission. I'm your mother. It's been so long. I just want to. Don't. Evan's voice cut through the air. One word. Low. Dangerous. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between her and his sisters. Don't touch us. The small circle around them went dead silent. Conversations nearby stalled. Heads turned. The tension became thick enough to feel on skin. Rachel felt it immediately. The eyes, the attention, the pressure. Panic crawled up her throat. This wasn't how she planned it. They were supposed to be emotional, conflicted, soft, grateful for her return, desperate. She looked at me, eyes filling with perfectly timed tears, and reached for the last card she had. Daniel, please, she said, loud enough for others to hear. I made a mistake. I was young. I was overwhelmed. Her voice trembled just enough. Don't turn them against me. I have a right to know my children. I glanced at Margaret, then back at Rachel. I took a calm sip of my drink. You relinquished your rights in a text message, Rachel, I said evenly. You didn't want to know them when they were hungry. I met her eyes. You don't get to know them now that they're full. I am their mother, she hissed, her voice cracking, breaking through the gala's polished surface. Are you? The question came from Evan. He stepped forward again, his height and stillness commanding the space. He didn't look angry. He looked finished. The jazz band faltered, then stopped completely. The clink of silverware faded. The ballroom locked onto the moment. Rachel held her ground, but her confidence splintered like thin ice. She searched Evan's face for the little boy who used to cling to her leg during thunderstorms. She didn't find him. She found a man with flint in his eyes. I am your mother, she repeated, her voice shaking now, performance and fear tangled together. You can't change biology. I gave you life. Evan stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. In the cavernous silence, his words carried. "You gave us biology," he said calmly. "You didn't give us life." He pointed not aggressively, just truthfully. "Dad gave us life. Dad fed us when there was no money. Dad kept us warm when the furnace died. Dad gave us a future." I was overwhelmed. Rachel cried, tears streaking down her emerald gown. I was 22. I didn't know how to handle 4 children and a husband who was a failure. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The word hung there ugly and exposed. I took a step forward instinctively, but Connor placed a firm hand on my chest, stopping me. His eyes said everything. "Let him finish. This is ours." Evan didn't flinch. He smiled, cold, humorless. "A failure," he repeated softly. "You left a man because he was pouring a foundation, and you were too impatient to wait for the cement to dry." He tilted his head slightly. "You didn't leave because he was failing. You left because you were selfish." "You don't understand," Rachel sobbed, reaching for Sophie's hand. Sophie recoiled instantly, as if burned, and tucked herself into the crook of Margaret's arm. The rejection was absolute. Evan's voice dropped lower, quieter, and somehow more terrifying. "Do you remember the night you left?" he asked. "Because we do." I was 8. Connor was 10. He didn't blink. "We waited by the window for 3 days. We thought you went to the store. We thought you got lost." Rachel's face drained of color. "Evan, stop." "We stopped waiting, Rachel," he said, using her first name like a blade. "We stopped waiting when Dad sold his own blood plasma so we could have winter coats. We stopped waiting when we realized the only person in the world who would die for us was the man you just called a failure." He gestured not grandly, just broadly, at the room, the wealth, the cameras, the applause still echoing in the walls. "You're here because you see the stock price," Evan said. "You see the gala. You see the cameras." His eyes swept over her designer dress with open disdain. "You want a return on an investment you sold 10 years ago." He leaned in close enough that she could smell his breath. "But you don't own shares in this family anymore. You cashed out." He straightened. "You're not a mother. You're just a woman we used to know." The words hit like a physical strike. Rachel stumbled backward, her heel catching in the carpet. She looked around desperately, at bankers, investors, socialites, searching for rescue. No one moved. The elite of Chicago, people who valued loyalty, legacy, and bloodlines, stared at her with quiet, unmistakable judgment. And in that silence, Rachel Miller finally understood. This wasn't her room anymore, and it never would be again. She finally understood. She wasn't the victim. She was the villain who had walked away from the hero before the story was finished. Rachel looked at me one last time. I stood straight, my arm resting easily around the woman who had actually raised her daughters. My expression was calm, settled, final. I didn't look at her with anger. I didn't look at her with bitterness. I didn't look at her at all. And that was the blow that broke her. Hate still means you matter. Indifference means you've already been erased. "Please leave," Evan said, stepping back into place beside us. "You're ruining the party." 2 security guards in dark suits appeared at Rachel's sides. They didn't grab her. They didn't have to. Their presence alone was enough. A solid, silent wall guiding her away from the warmth and light. "This way, ma'am," one of them said quietly, his tone professional and utterly unmoved by her tears. Rachel didn't resist. There was nothing left to fight with. She let herself be escorted through the parting crowd, the weight of 100 watching eyes burning into her back. The murmurs followed her, low, judgmental, merciless. More painful than the cold waiting outside. They reached the heavy brass doors of the Palmer house. One guard pushed a door open, and Chicago rushed in to meet her. "Wind, exhaust, winter. Have a good evening, ma'am," the guard said. The door shut behind her with a final click that echoed somewhere deep inside her. Rachel stood under the awning on the sidewalk. Taxis passed. Pedestrians laughed. Life moved forward without pausing for her collapse. She wrapped her arms around her bare shoulders, shivering. The emerald gown, so powerful in the mirror an hour earlier, now felt like a costume from a show that had been cancelled mid-performance. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She called Ethan. "The number you have reached is not available." She lowered the phone slowly. He hadn't missed the call. He'd turned his phone off, or blocked her. And with brutal clarity, she realized she wasn't going home to comfort or safety. She was going home to a penthouse owned by a man already planning her replacement. She'd left a good man for a rich one, and now she had neither. She glanced back at the glowing hotel windows. Inside, the music had started again. The ballroom had changed. The tension was gone, replaced by something protective and solid. I looked at Evan. His hands trembled slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Did I?" His voice cracked, suddenly young again. "Did I go too far, Dad?" I pulled him into a tight hug. "No," I said quietly. "You told the truth, and the truth is heavy." Connor, Sophie, and Emily stepped in, closing the circle. Margaret joined us naturally, her hand resting on Sophie's shoulder. Sophie didn't pull away. She leaned in. "Let's go," I said, looking around at my family. "I think we've had enough champagne and speeches for one lifetime." "Pizza?" Emily asked, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Deep dish," Connor said immediately. "The place on State Street." We moved together toward the private exit. A single unit forged by history, pain, and survival. We passed billionaires, politicians, socialites. I didn't look back. I didn't care about networking, or headlines, or stock prices. I looked at my children, the 4 lives I carried through fire. They weren't broken. They were forged. And I looked at Margaret, the woman who saw the steel and loved it. As we stepped out into the night through a side exit, far from where Rachel stood, the air felt clean, honest. I inhaled deeply. For 10 years, part of me had been holding my breath, waiting for the past to come back and demand payment. It had come. It had seen. And it had lost. "Come on," I said, opening the limo door. "Let's go home." The car pulled away, merging into traffic, leaving the city lights behind as we headed north, toward the trees, the quiet, and the future.